Welcome, everyone. Welcome again to those of you who have participated before in these webinars offered by the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. Today's alumni webinar, Cybersecurity, Not Having a Plan is Not an Option, is presented by your fellow alumni, David Burg and Stephen McOwen. My name is Eliza Parrish, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement for the Mason School of Business at the College of William & Mary. And as those of you who have participated before know, these webinars are offered as part of our pledge to provide you with opportunities for lifelong learning and professional development. It is always a special pleasure to bring them to you. It is even a greater pleasure when our expert presenters are Mason alumni. David Burg is a principal at PricewaterhouseCoopers U.S. Advisory Practice and PricewaterhouseCoopers Global and U.S. Advisory Cybersecurity Leader. He assists clients in reactive and proactive consulting capacities involving the deployment of information technology solutions and their use. Steve McOwen serves as the Vice President of Cyber Defense for Fidelity Investments. As a senior leader in enterprise cybersecurity organization, McOwen is responsible for incident response, security operations, and vulnerability management. Prior to joining Fidelity, McOwen was the Director of Security Operations at Cisco Systems for 14 years. This morning we sent out more extensive biographies on both gentlemen, but I wanted to not cover introductions, but turn it over to them and have more time for you to hear from them, not from me. So gentlemen, take it away.
Eliza, thank you very much, and good day to our fellow William & Mary alumnus all around the United States, hopefully all around the world. I'm very happy to be in Miller Hall today for the very first time. They graduated from the EMBA program back in 2005 when the building was merely on blueprint. So it's really nice to be here today in this really fine facility. We are going to do three things with you today. Number one, Steve and I are going to walk you through a discussion. That's really going to be structured into two parts. One is we want to make sure that we establish a baseline of understanding around what cybersecurity is, and we'll talk about what some of the major trends are in industry. And what kinds of questions senior management and board members are asking their cybersecurity teams about cybersecurity. Then we'll move into a conversation where Steve will really drill down into the details of what cyber attacks are and how they unfold. Throughout this discussion, we will put on the screen polling questions like the one that we hope you enjoyed as you were waiting for this webinar to commence. And we will also ask you, if you would, to submit questions in writing. We'll do our best to do an open Q&A towards the end of the discussion. And if we are unable to address questions, Steve and I will work together to respond to all of you in writing in the coming days. And so that's our plan of attack.
Exactly. Definitely your questions are being solicited.
So I think what we wanted to do real quick is just talk briefly about the survey, the first survey question, which I think is a really important one. Have you or your company been the victim of a cyber attack? And I'm not surprised by these results. We see about 25% say that they have neither been a victim of a personal attack or a corporate attack. Now, what's interesting to me about that is many times companies are not aware that they are the victim of an attack, and so we've seen for years and years, Steve's former employer, the FBI, will knock on the door of many U.S. companies. In 2014, over 3,000 companies were notified by the FBI that they were, in fact, the victim of a cyber attack. And so oftentimes, you're the victim of an attack, but you really don't even know it.
I think say that there are those that know they've been attacked and those that don't, but everyone falls in that bucket. And even if you haven't been directly attacked, your information, that personally identifiable information that is so important to you and critical, could have been compromised out of your control as well. So I think most of us have been victims or have the potential to be victims of a cyber attack in the near future.
So why don't we get into it? And if we can remove the polling question, we're going to move into some of our content here. And I think it's important that we start off and we talk about. Can you help us advance, guys? And while we are advancing the slide, we really want to talk about what cybersecurity is. And the term cybersecurity means many things to many people. It probably has its own unique connotation to you. I will tell you one quick funny vignette. I was talking to a young friend of one of my children. He said, "What do you do?" I said, "I do cybersecurity." He said, "That's really cool. I want to do that when I grow up." And then he said, "What's cybersecurity?" And the reality is, I think it really, the definition and the meaning of cybersecurity has changed, I think, dramatically over the last, say, 5 to 10 years. When I think about cybersecurity and you think about the way that businesses operate today, it isn't, we are not talking about only protecting the enterprise. And there's often a vision that you can protect the perimeter. You can keep the bad guys out. And that's the definition of cybersecurity. I don't believe that is the case at all today, because the way modern businesses operate, it relies on the use of technology, relies on connectivity into complex supply chains that are established in order to innovate and develop products and services quickly. And so the scope of the cybersecurity challenge really extends way beyond the enterprise and the physical locations and facilities that sit under the umbrella of the corporation itself. In fact, it extends not only to the supply chain, but it extends to devices, to things like mobile devices, which are exploding in use and popularity. And then later on, we'll even talk a little bit about the Internet of Things and how we are embedding technology in various kinds of products that communicate and are essentially alive. And so, really, I think one of the major themes of this discussion is that, we've been talking to our clients, and our clients have been telling us, and you'll see us in a few minutes talk about what CEOs in the United States and around the world are saying. But cybersecurity really has become a very important business strategic issue. It's an enterprise risk management issue, and I think it really is essential to the way that business is conducted today.
Yeah. From an internal security function, I would say you need to know your full ecosystem. So we talk about supply chain, vendors, outsourcing, what your full environment is so you can adequately protect it. Create a strategy to protect your key and critical assets, because you can't protect everything. So without full knowledge and full understanding of what that ecosystem is, you're going to have gaps built in. So I think it's very important that you have that full view and full visibility. So the next thing that Steve and I want to talk about are the threat actors. That's the terminology. I think you could call it. It's the language that's used in the cybersecurity industry to really talk about who the bad guys are. And I think it's really important to understand who these threat actors are. And it's also very important to understand what motivates these threat actors. I think that one of the important comments going into this, and one of the reasons why this is such an important issue to businesses all around the world, is that the estimates of damage associated with the attack activity across these groups, who we'll talk about in a moment. In many studies, in fact, at PwC, we and a not-for-profit piece of Microsoft called Create.org published a study where the damage is measured in percentage of GDP globally. So literally in the trillions of dollars every year. These are not insubstantial numbers, and you will hear as we talk about these threat actors and what they're after, some of the component parts that enable the estimates to go so high.
McKinsey has come out with numbers that are similar to the numbers that we've published. And, I think that it is not, I don't really think there's any dispute that this is a very significant, really a strategic problem for various nation states, and that really what we're talking about is something that's concerning from an economic security point of view. Let me, if I can, I'll go into what I think is the most serious of the adversaries, which are nation-state actors. These are many countries all around the world that utilize the fact that it's very hard to secure businesses and business processes as a strategic reason to attack companies that are specifically targeted for some specific reason. I think that one of the kind of the common threads across all of these adversaries that we'll talk about is that they are very good at knowing what they want, going after what they want, and getting what they want by and large. And so we've seen for years an acceleration in these nation-state type attacks where historically the concern was things like critical infrastructure, grid, large trading platforms, communication platforms were targeted. That may in fact be the case. But what has also happened is a very successful long-term campaign to go after designs of intellectual property, sensitive and strategic documents, communications. This impacts M&A, this impacts various kinds of trade negotiations. This impacts specific products and services that are being developed. And I think it's a really big deal.
Definitely. There are a number of nation states that have got very sophisticated, organized efforts to obtain intellectual property. A lot of it's for economic espionage to help their domestic industries. Some of it is for nation state security, so they have an idea of the capabilities of these other companies that take the technologies for their own defense.
So the next one I think we ought to talk about, on the slide I'm going to jump down to organized crime, because I think that organized crime actors around the world are very good at targeting information so it can be quickly converted into something of monetary value. And so, we've seen over the last 5 years quite a bit of activity in the retail and consumer space where payment card information has been targeted. You may recall we saw a significant amount of attack activity in the healthcare sector where what's known as personally identifiable information and protected health information was specifically targeted. Now, some of that may have been organized crime, some of that may have also been nation-state type activity, but those sets of information, payment card information, protected health information, personally identifiable information is converted into value. We also see, and Steve and I have been talking about over the last day that we've been together, talk about many of the sophisticated types of fraud schemes that are being perpetrated, where treasury functions are specifically being targeted, where large sums are being wire transferred out of organizations at the apparent request of the CEO or senior executive of an organization. And we also are seeing an increase, or I think a concerning increase in the number of ransomware type attacks where systems are compromised, companies are told pay up or else. And it's another very clever way to extract money from victims of crime. So I think this organized crime threat actor group is also very concerning.
And a particular concern too is they seem to be working in concert more frequently than they did in the past, where you'll see Russian criminal enterprise groups and Brazilian enterprise groups sharing techniques and procedures and practices and actually sharing code and working on things to get solutions together so they can leverage from each other's experience. So there's a lot of collaboration in this space. So our adversary is growing in their capabilities and they're working together to respond and to counter the defenses we put in place.
So the third group that our clients tell us all around the world they're worried about are hacktivists. And what a hacktivist is, it's an informal collection of hackers who will target companies or governments or entities or individuals just based on their own political views, their own philosophical views. And the goal of the hacktivist is to take information and make it available for the world to see. And so this is where there have been very significant government and corporate sets of information that have been exposed. There was a very big one that occurred this week in Panama, where an enormous amount of information was siphoned out of a law firm and made available for the world to see. So finally, we also have on this chart, or on this slide, we talk about insiders. Insiders could in theory be associated with any of those groups, but what an insider really is it is a legitimate employee who may work for an organization, who may be tasked to support any of those adversary groups in order to target information of value. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see a summary of the certain kinds of information that are specifically targeted from an industry or from a sector perspective. And I think the trends that are included on that chart, on that portion of the chart, I think they remain valid today and likely going forward.
I'll say another from the insider standpoint. Sometimes they work in concert with the external threat actors. They're a big challenge because of the legitimate access they have to your network and to your important data and resources, and are a particular challenge to detect and protect against those activities. And then another particular interest area of concern around hacktivists and all these groups is they're being more public once they do gain a foothold or compromise the system, to publicize that. So public trust, integrity, and your brand and image are significant risks, and we've seen that in the last couple of years where that's exploded as far as public disclosure.
So I want to move and talk for a few minutes about where businesses are and from a trend perspective. And what you see on this particular chart are a number of numbers. They come largely from our Global State of Information Security survey that we run at PwC. This is where we every year survey around 10,000 companies all around the world. We ask them a lot of questions about what they're doing from a cybersecurity perspective, what they're worried about, and I think there's some good news and some bad news in here. What I will close with on this slide are there are going to be 6 specific, I'll call them benchmark, we call them recommendations that I think you ought to hopefully take away and think about inside your organization. But I'm going to kind of go basically clockwise around these charts and comment briefly on many of the statistics here. There are some things that we think are positive, and one of the themes of our publication this year was really looking for positive trends, not just talking about all the bad things that are happening from a cybersecurity perspective. So from a positive perspective, we did see an increase in spend on security programs, and I think that's actually a very important finding, because we were surprised to see for the last 5 years that the number of attacks continued to increase, the severity of the attacks increased, that executives and corporations are becoming more and more aware, and yet we weren't seeing the trend of spend increasing, and it really didn't make sense. We were happy to see this year that in aggregate we saw close to 25% increase in cybersecurity budgets from a year-over-year basis. I think that's significant. Yep. Steve, I don't know if you want to comment on that one.
Yeah, definitely the technology is advancing, the capabilities are out there, and in order to address these new threats, companies need to invest in the technology as well as people and processes to improve their security posture, but technology is a key component to that.
Excuse me, gentlemen, a question has just come in that might be interesting to respond to. And it says, when you say businesses, is the data from private sector, corporate businesses, or does it also include government?
The data that we're citing here is largely excluding private sector. So, I'm sorry, excluding government entities. So this is private sector corporations all around the world. There is a subset of the respondents that may or do work for governments, but I would look at this as really being driven by corporate respondents in the United States and all around the world. So thank you for that question. I think that on the far right of the chart, there are some statistics that relate to organizations that are actually doing things that we think are strategically important. I think it's interesting to me that almost 70% of our respondents indicate that they're using some sort of cloud-based capability to improve their cybersecurity program and their stance. We saw that almost 60% of the respondents purchased cybersecurity insurance. I will comment that the trend around cybersecurity insurance is one we'll talk about in a bit when we talk about board questions. But boards, to not just to spoil the surprise, boards are increasingly asking management, do we own cybersecurity insurance as a form of risk transfer, risk arbitrage. I think it's interesting that almost 60% of respondents are using big data analytic capabilities to try to understand or to see better what is happening inside the enterprise. I think that they call it the big data and the analytic piece is an incredibly important component to be able to understand what is in fact happening inside an organization. Again, we talked a little bit earlier about views around what cybersecurity is. I think what some of the big data analytic techniques are enabling is not only is someone connected to the infrastructure, but what are they doing? How are they doing it? Where are they doing it from? And so I think this is where we see a union of the importance of threat intelligence, and we see more and more of our respondents actually actively using threat intelligence as a means of helping them understand how the bad guys operate. But I think what's also important about the big data analytics is being able to use, this is where machine learning, where artificial intelligence, we're looking at patterns of activities among massive amounts of information can really help to discern or to isolate or to indicate that an attack is underway or in fact is being executed. And I think when Steve goes into our deep dive in a few minutes, we'll talk about some of these challenges.
Yeah. It's very important to have verbose logging, so you have that record of what occurred. You can use the analytics you talked about. If you have a user who's normally logging in between 9 and 10 a.m. on the East Coast, and all of a sudden you see them logging in from a foreign location at odd times of the night, that's some intelligence that maybe something could be, some malicious actor if that person's not traveling. So you can take your travel records of, is this employee traveling? Here's their remote access login records. Here are the resources, and through that, will profile you have of their normal behavior and determine anomalies.
Just real quick, so a question came in about can you in the audience get a copy of these slides? Eliza's answer is yes, and so we will send to you a copy of the slides that we're using, so you can read the statistics at your leisure. Let me just make a couple other points on here, and then we'll move off of this. I mean, I think one of the ones that's very important is that 56% of respondents in this survey indicated that there was the theft of hard intellectual property. So that was a big increase from prior surveys. I mean, again, I think that's one of the biggest risk issues for corporations is protecting intellectual property. What the survey is telling us is that more victims are actually detecting that they were attacked, and what they have determined through their investigation is that intellectual property was in fact targeted. So let me just quickly wrap up and give you, there are 6, I think, important, we'll call them benchmark capabilities or programs that I hope you will take away from this discussion. And all 6 of these, I think, are important because close to half of all respondents have one or more of these components in place. I mean, number 1 is actually having a security program. Number 2 is conducting employee training and education, incredibly important. Steve, you may want to comment on that in a few minutes here. Number 3 is actually thinking about and having a security program or baseline requirements for third parties. I think that's a really important one, actually. Again, we talk about the cybersecurity challenge. We are talking about these connected business ecosystems. Third parties are incredibly important for you to keep in mind and keep in scope. Number 4 is having a chief information security officer, someone who's responsible for the strategy and the execution of and the measurement and the performance of a cybersecurity program. Number 5 is actually doing some sort of a threat assessment. I think it's also important to understand what threat actors may be after you and why. And number 6 is having an ongoing, active ability to monitor and analyze threat intelligence that is maybe shared in various industry groups, via various governments, by various peers. Across those 6, Steve, I don't know if there are any you want to comment on, but
information sharing and collaboration is definitely, as our adversaries are working together, we need to work more closely together with people in our industry to understand the challenges and threats we face, as well as with law enforcement and other intelligence agencies that can help there. There are a lot of external resources and service and intelligence service feeds that help there as well, but I think in-industry collaboration is a key component to success there. Another point is around people. People are sometimes the weakest link, and so I think we have a question up here around security awareness training, and about 3/4 of our respondents have some type of security awareness or training. And I think that's pretty critical. It can't get you 100% of the way, as we talked earlier, through phishing exercises and other types of awareness. You can get a lot of visibility and a lot of knowledge around this, but it's not the complete solution. But I think it also sends a message, too, that security is everyone's responsibility, and so that you need to be in a culture where they understand that you can challenge things if you see something that doesn't look right from a security standpoint. Like you talked about the wire fraud, when that comes in from an executive, you don't say, okay, well, I think this is from the CEO, I've got to respond to this right away. You understand that, I need to do some due diligence here, make sure that this is a valid request, and validate before I respond. So I think people and training is really important there.
So just so one comment on the survey response. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised that our very smart William and Mary alumnus are scoring higher than our survey respondents did. It's because they work for smart organizations all around the world. But I think that is a pretty significant. It's almost a 25% point increase over what our survey respondents said around training and awareness. I also see a question coming in here about cyber insurance, and I think the question is really around what to look for when purchasing cyber insurance. Again, what we saw is a big uptick in the number of companies that purchase cybersecurity insurance. Determining how much coverage you need can be a challenging exercise. I think what you really got to look at are what the component parts are going to cover, and so oftentimes it's really broken down into 2 tranches. One tranche can be to actually fund the investigation. Another component part could be to respond to the results of an investigation. Another tranche could be to actually remediate pieces of the investigation. I think that insurance companies and underwriters, I think, have a hard time pricing these policies. Steve and I were talking about, I think that now is actually a good time to buy a policy. I think it will be hard at points in the future perhaps to be renewed if you do, in fact, experience an event. And maybe you can talk about what's going on at Fidelity Investments as a case study on this topic.
So definitely, I think cyber insurance, after we saw some of the Target and Anthem breaches, there was a big uptick in companies feeling the need from a due diligence standpoint to have some type of insurance. I think the industry doesn't quite understand exactly the scope of the threat. So the policies now maybe aren't providing full coverage, but I would say that there's definitely a trend towards moving to insurance, and would encourage you to do so to mitigate the risks.
So another question came in, then we'll move off of this slide, but another question came in. The question is, can you see trend data as opposed to a snapshot in time? If ELISA is amenable, one thing we can also do is distribute our full report, where there's an enormous amount of information that is summarized here on this slide. And she's giving me the thumbs up, so we will also distribute to you our FY16 report. I think one of the other things that's important in that report is we do a lot of analysis where we take the data and we segment it by company size, where we look at large companies that have revenues of greater than $2 billion, mid-size and small companies. And there are actually interesting and significant differences when you look at the results across those different segments. So we'll share that report with you for your information. I mentioned earlier that this is a senior executive and a board level issue. So these are, I think, some really interesting statistics that make that case. So what we have here is a chart on the slide that talks about CEO sentiments, and we were measuring two things. We're measuring their concern, their concern being either somewhat or extreme, relating to the rapid change in the pace of adoption of technologies, and then also we ask their somewhat or extreme concern relating to cyber threats. We compare the results in the United States with the CEOs from around the world, excluding those from the United States. I think in summary, what you can see here is that CEOs are very concerned, extremely concerned about both of these topics. I think on the rapid pace of technology change, I think we also know that CEOs see great promise in the use of technology. I think it's also interesting to note that the U.S. CEOs are more concerned about that change than their peers around the world. And we see the exact same phenomenon when we ask the question around cyber threats, except U.S. CEOs are even more concerned about cyber threats than they are the rapid pace of technology change. On the other side of the chart, we see that almost half, so it's 45% of boards today, participate in the overall cybersecurity strategy in the company. And so it's really what we want to do is really drill down into that board piece for a few minutes, because I think this is a really important trend area to understand. And you, in your role, either as an officer or a member of management in your company or in a professional services capacity, I think should be aware of these important trends.
I would say definitely so. It's in the last 2 years, especially in the financial industry, the senior executives, before it was more of a push of security information to try to get that audience with the board, and it's come the exact opposite way in the last 2 years, where they're reading about these incidents and attacks in the news, and they want information. They want to understand what is going on. They want detail so that they can see, what could the potential impact be to the business, so they have a better understanding on helping to create that strategy. So that's been a big change I've seen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and so, at PwC, I was recently talking with our Center for Board Governance, who study all things relating to how boards are governing and providing their oversight function. Cybersecurity has now, for the last couple of years, been a really, really big topic of conversation, and our clients are asking our partners and our teams, whether we're doing audit work, tax work, consulting work, they're asking more and more about cybersecurity. But what we wanted to do is spend a few minutes and let you know some of the high-level areas where boards are probing and where they're asking questions. I think the first one is an interesting one, which is around due care. Many boards are asking, what is an appropriate level of cybersecurity program capability? How do we know? And are there liability risks and concerns if we're not meeting a due care standard? Steve,
Absolutely. People talk about best practices, and that's kind of nebulous, but is there a certain minimum standard of security you need to implement in order to be reasonably secure, a reasonable security organization? And that's a tough thing to define based on the threats you're experiencing, your infrastructure. It's there's no certain line there, though. There are some frameworks that are being created, and this cybersecurity framework is one that I see more companies adopting to kind of do an assessment and get an idea of, okay, if we reach this certain level of controls and maturity, we may be perceived as being responsible in due diligence.
But what's challenging about this question is there really, even though there are very good frameworks, and we happen to agree that NIST, it's called the CyberSecurity Framework 1.0, is a phenomenal framework, but it's not prescriptive. And very few frameworks and very few regulators actually will tell you whether or not you're doing enough. Now, I think we certainly do see movement where in the financial services industry, I think this is really where much more prescriptive guidance about the certain kinds of security controls that need to be in place is getting closer to answering that question. But perhaps the next iteration of this NIST cybersecurity framework will provide more prescriptive guidance. It would likely need to be done by industry or by segment because the risks are very different from industry to industry. But again, boards are asking questions about this. The second area boards are asking a lot of questions are around what's happening with the cybersecurity program. Can you provide some metrics and performance? And on our next slide, we'll show you some of those metrics that companies are providing up to boards or that boards are asking to be briefed on.
So I would say we're briefing quarterly to the board of directors and various senior executive groups. There are certain metrics they want to see that they're asking about. And I would say we use the opportunity. You don't want to overwhelm them with metrics. You want to identify a few key metrics and then set measurements there. And as you achieve those, then add in new ones with programs you're trying to achieve. So definitely leverage the opportunity to get in front of the board, to educate them, give them awareness, and use that opportunity to get resources and the support you need to actually move your program forward. Because as you said, these frameworks are great, but they aren't prescriptive. Do X, Y, and Z and you're secure. They're just general control guidelines, and you need to develop your own policies and processes and roadmap of how you're going to achieve those controls.
So real quick, I see a question that came in around that NIST, that National Institute of Science and Technology framework. We mentioned 1.0. The question is, when does 2.0 come out? Right now, NIST is working, they're receiving comments and feedback from industry in the United States and around the world. I don't know the specific timing. I know that they're working on drafting 2.0 and again trying to understand how that 1.0 can be improved. I don't know the specific timing on that.
No, I think sometime in the next 12 months is expected, but
yeah. So I want to move a little bit more quickly here because we got lots of good information to share with you. The third area where boards are asking questions around, how are we managing risks when we use various third parties who take responsibility for handling information that may be sensitive information. And again, when you think about the way modern businesses are conducted, it is almost certain that third parties have access to information or to handle the responsibility of running a business process. More and more boards are asking questions around this, I think, very important topic. We talked a bit about cyber insurance before. Again, boards are absolutely asking questions about it. Again, I don't think that's surprising given how much the adoption of cyber insurance has increased over the last few years. Number 5, I think, is an important one, and Steve, mentioned it earlier. But boards are asking more and more questions about what are we doing to be good corporate citizens, to both share information about the threats that are experienced, but also what are we doing to consume information that may come from, again, industry groups, from governments, from various other information dispensing companies or entities. I think in the United States that the administration has been pushing very hard on the concept of information sharing and analysis organizations. I can tell you at PwC, we've been very active working closely with Michael Daniel and with DHS. So in the administration, and in DHS respectively, to really think through how to make these information sharing and analysis organizations work. I think it's a very, very important trend. And again, boards are pushing their management teams to be active participants in this process.
Absolutely. There are industry verticals that have got information that are very specific to your industry. There's great collaborative forums there as well where you can meet other practitioners and get an understanding of what their challenges are. And it's a great way to share information directly one-on-one that the umbrella organization allows you to do. So if you're going to stay ahead of your adversary and know what they're doing, they're targeting your competitors, they're targeting other companies in your verticals, and you want to make sure you're staying in tune with that.
So we'll cover the last three real quick here. M&A, big deal. Company boards want to know what management is doing to put the right kinds of protections in place when a company is acquired. I'm seeing more and more requests, believe it or not, on when it comes to doing due diligence to actually perform cyber due diligence as part of the deal risk, the deal value execution process. I think that's extremely important. We talked about insider threat. Boards more and more are asking, what are we doing? What are we doing to manage risks that employees, they go rogue, maybe they have some motivation to go after sensitive information. More boards are asking, what do we do about insider threat? And the last area is boards are asking, do we have an incident response plan? Do we have a playbook? What happens if we experience a serious breach? Do we test the plan? And are members of management from many different functional areas involved in that plan, in that testing? Because I think the companies that get it right have members of management across all different functional areas looking at the issue and helping manage the issue. Again, that is when the issue is identified to be serious enough. But more and more boards are asking questions about that.
Absolutely. I would say around this, when your adversary is doing reconnaissance and trying to understand in your environment, they're going to look for the weakest link. And quite often that is third parties, right? They're going to go to those smaller suppliers. They're going to try to find any open door they can get there. Mergers and acquisitions is an area when you acquire a company and they could have already been compromised and you're going to be connecting their systems up to your network. There are a lot of challenges there, so you have to do that due diligence before. You want to get the assessments that they had breaches before. There are questions you definitely want to ask before you connect another company into your company, whether it be a third party or whether it be a merger and acquisition. And around incident response plan, definitely you need to have a plan. You need to have it tested with the key stakeholders in your company. You want to make sure they're on board: legal, PR, communications, IT, all of those main core functions. And if you're going to leverage third-party providers for incident response or forensics or other capabilities, you want to include them in your testing, right? You don't want to have an event and then be testing how they interact with your internal processes.
So we see our polling question here, and 42% of our respondents that are participating in the survey today do not have a program to assess the security posture of critical vendors and suppliers. So that number's ticking up. I think that, for those of you that responded no to that, I think that's another important takeaway from this discussion today. I'm not going to spend much time on this because we are getting a little bit compressed on time, but when you look at the material, what you'll see here are the specific metrics that can be used by boards to evaluate the status of the information technology health inside the organization, really look at operational cyber risks, certain kinds of obligations and responsibilities from more of a regulatory perspective, and ways of actually monitoring the effectiveness of a cybersecurity program. So again, on this particular slide, I think there's some very good KPIs that can be used and which we know boards are asking as they evaluate objectively the performance of a cybersecurity program. And just real quick to wrap this up, I think there are just 4 additional points that I think are important, and they are the reasons why cybersecurity has become a board oversight issue. And I think number 1 is, and we really haven't hit on this, but this cybersecurity issue is absolutely global. This is not isolated to any particular geography. Multinational corporations operating all around the world have cybersecurity issues and obligations anywhere they operate. The financial costs associated with breaches when they occur can be significant, and they can be when they are publicly notified, they can lead increasingly to class action lawsuits. Point number 3 is that we think that there will be continuing pressure placed on corporations to deal with regulatory compliance obligations. We expect that burden will get greater. I actually think there's good in that burden, in that we see in industries that are heavily regulated, we generally actually see stronger and better cybersecurity program capability. This is where that prescriptive guidance is so darn important.
And even if you're not in one of those heavily regulated industry, if you do business with one, those requirements are passing through to their vendors and their suppliers. So if you're not an immediate regulatory impact, you're going to have that with your pass through from your customers.
Last point, we touched on it briefly, but the Internet of Things is, in fact, it's both increasing the capability of products and services. It also increases risk. Millions and millions and millions of new devices are connected to this business ecosystem, and they create promise and challenge as well. Now, for my shameless plug before I turn it over to Steve to do his deep dive, we launched just about a month or so ago on the Wall Street Journal something called Broader Perspectives. When you receive this content, you can click on the link and you can read it. We think it's a important place where we're able to share quite a bit of contemporaneously important information about cybersecurity, and it's really designed to be consumed by business users. So I would invite you to go take a look at Broader Perspectives at your leisure. Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Dave. So we're going to give a little information around advanced threats. You may have heard the term APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. So we're going to delve into a little bit of a more advanced adversary who is dedicated to compromising your environment and executing on some type of action. There's a military framework called kill chain that was adopted by Lockheed Martin called the cyber kill chain. We're going to walk through an example of how an advanced adversary would use those steps in the kill chain in order to identify you, do reconnaissance, identify and target your company with malware to achieve some objective. And you've seen a lot of impacts. They're either going to exploit to gain data, intellectual property, credit card information. Some of them want to disrupt. Hacktivists we talked about before may want to disrupt and mar the image of the face of your website, mar your capabilities so that you have outages. We've seen that. And then, of course, we've recently heard about destruction. A number of examples in the news, especially Sony, where systems were destroyed. And so we're seeing this grow. The protections aren't growing to scale with our adversaries at this point. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain concept is actually very important, because really the idea is to try to disrupt the threat actor. It could be any of those threat actor groups that we talked about before, as far up the chain as possible. And I think that really the companies that are very good at cybersecurity are able to see something happening very early on and able to eradicate it and do something about it. It is not a good day when you are notified by the FBI or by the Secret Service or by a law enforcement agency around the world that your data has left the building. It's really not. And so that type of what we call exfiltration, it's the removal of information from a corporate environment, usually happens far down in that kill chain construct, and you clearly do not want to get to that point, because depending upon what was exfiltrated, this is what triggers notification to consumers in the United States and in various places around the world. I will tell you that in the European Union, in this calendar year, we're going to see very serious breach disclosure laws kick in that will, I think, are the most serious that we've seen anywhere around the world, that will punish those companies who are victims of cybercrime measured in the percentage of gross revenue. So this kill chain concept, I think, really does encapsulate this important framework of how attacks unfold. And again, the goal is to try to limit the damage as far up that kill chain as possible.
Absolutely. When we talk about acting on objectives, that's that disruption, that's that data theft, and you don't want to be there, right? You don't want to be reporting to your board what occurred. So the earlier on you can engage and you can detect, the more able you are to protect and prevent that from occurring. But also after an event occurs, you want to be able to go back and see how they did do reconnaissance, what the techniques they're using, so then you can create better controls and systems to prevent future attacks. So you need to have a good system that can analyze things after an event as well and learn from that. So we talked about the three main threat actors here. And in general, they used to operate more in silos, and we've seen them collaborating inside of silos as well as now across, from criminal enterprises working with nation states and selling them access to systems. We have them developing exploits which they will sell as well. And so there's a lot more cross collaboration here between those three groups than we saw in the past. From a normal standpoint, they have their motives, money, financial. On the criminal side, mainly hacktivists, we talked about wanting to have to damage the reputation of someone or to further some message they want to get out, and the nation states around economic espionage and national security to protect their countries. I would say in the past, the nation states were the most advanced adversary, but with the ability to monetize and other activities, the criminal enterprises are getting very good. They've created a real business out of this. Organized crime has become very organized. They have IT type of services. They're very advanced in how they're doing this. Of course, they're using a variety of tools to achieve their objectives, some from very non-targeted, that you see on the left side of the screen, over to very targeted tools like zero-day exploits, working with insiders, using duress and other means to try to get access, and spear phishing, which is a very targeted, usually email campaign, where it looks very legitimate, and even to security professionals quite often, they would be fooled by these types of attacks. They go and they get reconnaissance about your firm, who the executives are, who they do business with, and they craft very legitimate looking, and they create infrastructure as well to have it look like it's coming from a legitimate source.
Question came in about what is zero-day exploit.
So when a vulnerability is identified, it can be by researchers or by these criminal enterprises. Before it is announced, they call it zero day because it is not known. Reasonable disclosure, usually researcher will go work with a company and say, look, we found this exploit. They have these bug bounty programs we talked about where sometimes you get paid for disclosing these with the company. The company has time to fix it, create a patch, and then it's disclosed that there's a vulnerability, but there's a way to protect against it. So zero-day exploits will be these researchers, and sometimes these nation states have very large organizations that do this. They'll create an exploit. They will not publicize it because they're going to use that exploit to compromise systems. Now, they don't want to use zero-day exploits because they're harder to create and to make. So they're going to go the easiest route possible. But when certain easier techniques like just general phishing or spam or these waterhole type of attacks don't work, they'll use these special tools, these zero-day exploits, to achieve their mission and act on the objective.
Yeah, one of the things I would just comment on, I think is a big and important area of improvement is around threat intelligence. And so, you hear us, we talked a bit earlier about threat intelligence, but there's a burgeoning business which is to accumulate information about these threat actors, what they do, how they do it. And so what's happening more and more is that companies, governments, and law enforcement agencies are getting much, much better at being able to attribute an attack to a particular threat actor. I think that's very important because when you know who is attacking you, you can figure out who is attacking you. That tells you a lot about likely what they may be after, what their motives are. I think those are the kinds of things that boards ask as well, and any executive will ask is, why are we being targeted? The skills to be able to attribute attacks are improving dramatically. Many of my clients ask me, is this threat intelligence overhyped? And I say it does depend, which is a good William and Mary answer from the economists. It does depend because having the information is one thing, but you need to be able to do something with it. And I think many companies today are buying lots of threat intelligence, but they're struggling to be able to actually do something with it. And I think that's an important process point, is you want to be able to very quickly, if there is a 0 day, something that's never been seen before, you want to be able to go check to see whether that 0 day has in fact manifested in your environment. And I would say many companies today really struggle with that task.
Operationalizing threat intelligence is very challenging. And it's definitely, when you can do that, when we look at the kill chain, you can move earlier on. And I think, say the 0 day, when Heartbleed came out, that got published, and it impacted a lot of the web infrastructure. And there was a scramble to try to address that. And we saw within 3 or 4 hours of it being publicly disclosed, numerous attempts, right? The scanning, the probing, those types of active attempts on our infrastructure. So there's the hackers move very quickly. They monitor this type of information, and you'll see them weaponize these types of attacks very quickly. Whereas in the past, it may take weeks or days. Now it's within hours where something is disclosed, and the weaponization of attacks against your infrastructure you'll be seeing them.
Yeah, and I guess one last point on this is that I think we're going to see a lot of evolution in terms of business models that are able to quickly respond to these kinds of vulnerabilities. And so one of the examples that I like to talk about is the difference between automobile manufacturers responding to vulnerabilities which were discovered. So you may remember about a year or so ago, it was disclosed that Jeep had a vulnerability in their vehicle fleet, and so did Tesla. Now, the way that these two companies responded to that vulnerability were very different. Jeep had to go send out millions of thumb drives with a patch on them to consumers, and the consumer had to plug the thumb drive in and then update the software in the Jeep fleet. I'm pretty sure it's very hard to get to 100% update or compliance with that process. On the other hand, Tesla's business model was one where they pushed a patch overnight and their entire fleet was updated. I think we will see over time more and more business models look more like that Tesla model. In some of the software development language, we talk about DevOps being an important model. I think it's a very efficient and effective model to be able to see a vulnerability and very quickly push the update into the production environment without having to go through a whole series of testing before actually making that live in production.
Probably some legal and liability things that need to be addressed before that, but I definitely agree that's the way to go, because there's no time for end users to have to respond and do this themselves. Automatically should be great. Alrighty, so we're just going to go through a little example here. So we talked about quite often you have different file attachments that might be blocked at your perimeter by your security team. So they know that these types of files have malicious capabilities, and so you won't receive them. But most companies need to be able to receive resumes to hire. And so what we've seen here is, from a reconnaissance standpoint, is they'll want to use they'll go out and look for you hiring. Example here is a Craigslist job posting, and they were able to submit a Word document. So most companies in their HR department will receive Word documents so they can look at resumes. And inside of that, they had a macro-enabled Word document with malware. And what's really interesting about the Craigslist capability is they're able to send that through Craigslist. So they're leveraging Craigslist infrastructure to fully anonymize themselves from what the source of this email is. It's something that the company receives. They accept things through Craigslist through this mechanism because they posted this way, and they're able to deliver that past your normal controls and defenses because HR needs access to this. Similarly, they're out doing reconnaissance on LinkedIn. A lot of companies use LinkedIn to recruit and show the associations among their executives and their HR department and other groups. And there's another method through which you can send these types of malicious attachments to the end user, and they'll be received.
Yeah, and I think that again, we talked earlier about the importance of end user education. That's one of those 6 baseline things that I think is quite important. And the education actually can be very cheap and very effective. And one thing Steve and I have also talked about over the last day is the importance in some cases of testing employees by using certain kinds of programs that will send phishing kinds of emails, and you can measure and you can monitor compliance rates or activities that occur on the employee side of the house, and really makes tangible and real the way that various kinds of external parties may interface with a company. And you can also just test and see how employees behave in the real world.